One day before my son's wedding, I discovered that his bride slept with my ex-husband, his father. I told my son everything, and what he did at the "I do" moment left everyone speechless. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because this story is about to get wild. But before we dive into the chaos, let me explain how we got here. I was married to Richard for 5 years, and let me tell you, this man could charm the pants off a nun, literally, which, as it turns out, was exactly the problem. Richard is the kind of handsome that makes women do stupid things. Tall, silver-haired, with this smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. That's how he got me, pregnant at 22 and married before I knew what hit me. We had Daniel, and for a while, I thought we were living the dream. Then I found out he'd been living several dreams, with half the city, including my best friend Sarah, my cousin Lisa, and apparently anyone with a pulse and questionable judgment. The man treated fidelity like a suggestion rather than a commitment, so we divorced. Richard wasn't exactly father of the year after that. Missed birthdays, skipped school events, basically treated parenting like a hobby he'd pick up when convenient. But here's the thing about Richard. When he did show up, he came bearing gifts, expensive ones. Cars for Daniel's 16th birthday, college tuition paid in full, designer, everything. My son grew up thinking his dad hung the moon, while I was the bitter ex-wife who couldn't get over the past. Every time I tried to explain what kind of man Richard really was, Daniel would shut me down. "Mom, he loves me. He's generous. You're just holding grudges." Sure, kid. Generous with his wallet, cheap with his presence, but try explaining that to a 25-year-old who thinks daddy's money equals daddy's love. Now, about my future daughter-in-law, Samantha Williams. And yes, those Williams, the ones with the real estate empire and the country club memberships. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Beautiful girl, I'll give her that. Blonde, tall, looks like she stepped out of a magazine. Perfect for my successful, handsome son. Perfect for him, horrible for me. What I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that the Williams empire was built on borrowed time and maxed out credit lines. Behind those designer clothes and country club smiles was a family drowning in debt, desperately looking for a life raft. Daniel, with his trust fund and promising career, must have looked like salvation itself. From day one, Samantha treated me like I was something she'd scrape off her designer shoes. Oh, she was polite, can't fault her manners. Always said the right things, smiled at the right moments. But I've been around long enough to read between the lines, and honey, those micro-expressions don't lie. The way she'd look at me when she thought I wasn't watching, like I was the hired help who'd forgotten her place. The way she'd interrupt me mid-sentence to ask Daniel about something important. The way she'd rearrange my suggestions for the wedding like I was a child playing with toy blocks. I didn't like her, she didn't like me, and we both pretended everything was sunshine and roses because that's what civilized people do. What fun! But here's what really got under my skin. I'd started noticing things at family gatherings. The way Samantha would laugh just a little too hard at Richard's jokes. The way she'd find excuses to touch his arm during conversations. The way Richard would look at her with that same predatory gleam I'd seen 1,000 times before. I told myself I was being paranoid, jealous maybe, seeing problems where none existed because I couldn't stand the thought of my ex-husband charming another woman in my family. Turns out, my paranoia was actually pretty good intuition. Daniel decided on a beach wedding, 3 days at a luxury resort, oceanfront ceremony, the whole 9 yards. Very romantic, very expensive, very much what Samantha wanted. They'd already done the civil ceremony in town a few days earlier for legal convenience, complete with the standard prenup Daniel's family lawyer had insisted on. Just routine protection, he'd called it. This weekend was all about the celebration, the party, the big show. We all arrived on Friday afternoon. Family, friends, the whole wedding circus. The resort was gorgeous, I'll admit. White sand, crystal blue water, rooms that cost more per night than most people's rent. Richard was there, of course, playing the proud father role to perfection in his designer suit and fake humility. The welcome dinner was exactly what you'd expect from a Samantha production. Elegant, expensive, and exhausting. Tables arranged just so. Flowers that probably cost more than my car payment, and enough champagne to float a yacht. I sat at the family table, watching my son work the room like the charming young man I'd raised him to be. Daniel was in his element, handshaking, backslapping, making everyone feel welcome and appreciated. My heart swelled with pride, even as my stomach churned with dread, Because while Daniel was being the perfect host, I was watching his perfect bride and perfect father-in-law create their own little bubble of inappropriate intimacy. Richard would lean in close when talking to Samantha, his hand lingering on her shoulder just a beat too long. She'd throw her head back, laughing at his stories, her fingers trailing across his arm as she reached for her wine glass. They shared inside jokes, finished each other's sentences, and generally acted like they'd known each other for years instead of months. "Mom, you okay?" Daniel appeared beside me, concern creasing his forehead. "You look like you're plotting someone's murder." "Just enjoying the festivities, sweetheart," I lied smoothly. "Your bride certainly knows how to throw a party." He beamed at that, proud as punch. "She's amazing, isn't she? I can't believe I get to marry her tomorrow." Neither could I, but probably not for the same reasons. The evening wound down around 11, with everyone retiring to their rooms to prepare for the big day. Daniel and Samantha were staying in separate rooms, some old tradition about not seeing each other before the ceremony for good luck. In this case, it was going to provide perfect cover for very bad luck. I tried to sleep, really I did, but something kept nagging at me, some instinct I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the ocean air, or maybe it was 20 years of experience with Richard's wandering hands. Whatever it was, sleep wasn't happening. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and decided to take a walk. The hotel corridors were quiet, dimly lit, peaceful. I thought maybe some fresh air on the balcony overlooking the ocean would help clear my head and find some calm before tomorrow's chaos. That's when I heard it, a woman's voice, soft and breathy, coming from behind Richard's door. My first thought was that Richard had found himself a bridesmaid or a cousin or some other wedding guest for his usual entertainment. The man had never met a social gathering he couldn't turn into his personal hunting ground. I almost kept walking. His sex life was no longer my problem, thank God. But something made me pause. Maybe it was the familiarity in that voice, or maybe it was just my overactive imagination working overtime. Either way, I found myself tiptoeing closer to his door like some ridiculous spy in a bad movie. I couldn't make out words, just sounds. The kind of sounds that made it very clear what was happening in that room. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. Leave it to Richard to be screwing around the night before his son's wedding. Some things never change. I was about to continue my walk when the door opened, and out stepped Samantha, my future daughter-in-law, my son's bride-to-be, emerging from my ex-husband's room at 2 a.m. with her hair mussed, her silk robe askew, and that particular glow that comes from recent physical activity. I ducked behind a decorative pillar, my heart hammering so loud I was sure the entire hotel could hear it. Richard appeared in the doorway, shirtless, his own hair disheveled, wearing that same satisfied smirk I'd seen countless times during our marriage. "We can't do this again," Samantha whispered, but her voice was thick with emotion. "After tomorrow, everything changes." "I know," Richard replied, his voice surprisingly gentle. Seeing you so nervous about the wedding, about becoming part of this family, I wanted to comfort you. One last time." "You always know exactly what to say," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. "You make me feel like everything's going to be okay." "Because it is. Daniel loves you. You're going to be happy. But what about us? What about this? This was just goodbye. A way to let go of what we both know we can't have." She laughed bitterly. "God, we're terrible people, aren't we? Maybe. But we're not hurting anyone if no one knows." My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, managing to start recording just as Samantha leaned up to kiss him goodbye. Not a peck on the cheek, not a friendly farewell, a desperate, passionate kiss that looked like the end of something rather than the beginning. "I should go," she whispered against his lips. "I know." He touched her face gently. "Sweet dreams, future Mrs. Matthews. Tomorrow, you start your real life." "Sweet dreams, Richard. And thank you for everything." They both disappeared behind their respective doors, leaving me alone in the hallway with a phone full of evidence and a heart full of rage. I should have marched to Samantha's room right then. I should have pounded on Daniel's door and shown him the video immediately. I should have done something, anything, other than stand there like a statue, processing what I'd just witnessed. But I was in shock. Complete, total, paralyzing shock. My son's bride, my ex-husband, the night before their wedding. In my wildest nightmares, I couldn't have imagined this level of betrayal. I must have stood in that hallway for 10 minutes before my legs remembered how to work. When they did, I found myself outside Daniel's room, my fist poised to knock, my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. He answered on the third knock, bleary-eyed and confused. "Mom, what's wrong? What time is it?" "I need to talk to you," I said, pushing past him into the room. "Now. It's about Samantha and your father." That woke him up fast. "What about them? Is everything okay?" I looked at my son, my beautiful, trusting, about to be devastated son, and felt my heart break a little. "Honey, you need to sit down." "Mom, you're scaring me. What happened?" I just saw Samantha leaving Richard's room, and they weren't discussing wedding plans. The color drained from Daniel's face. "What are you talking about?" I showed him the video. "Watching your child's world crumble is a special kind of hell." Daniel went from confused to disbelieving to horrified to something cold and calculating in the span of 2 minutes. His hands shook as he held my phone, watching the evidence over and over again like he could somehow change what he was seeing. "This can't be real," he whispered. He wouldn't. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." He was quiet for a long time, just staring at the phone screen. When he finally looked up, his eyes had a hardness I'd never seen before. "How long do you think this has been going on?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Maybe it was just tonight, or—" I trailed off. No point in twisting the knife. He stood up suddenly, pacing to the window and back. "You know what's funny? I was nervous about tomorrow, about whether I was making the right choice, whether we were ready for marriage. Guess the universe just answered that question for me. Honey, we need to call off the wedding. We need to confront them both. We need to—" "No." His voice was calm but final. "You don't do anything. You don't say anything to anyone. Do you understand me?" I stared at him. "Daniel, you can't seriously be thinking of going through with this." He turned back to me, and his expression was scary in its composure. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll handle it." "Handle it how? You're supposed to marry her tomorrow. Trust me. Just trust me." He walked to the door and opened it, but his expression softened when he saw my face. "I know this is hard. I know you want to protect me. But I need to do this my way, okay?" The door slammed in my face with enough force to rattle the frame. I stood there for a moment, stunned. My son had just discovered his bride was cheating with his father, and he was throwing me out of his room like I was the problem, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Men, I swear, they're all insane. I didn't sleep. How could I? My mind was racing with questions, scenarios, and an overwhelming urge to march down the hall and give both Richard and Samantha a piece of my mind, preferably with my fists. But Daniel had been clear. Stay out of it. Let him handle it. The question was, how exactly did he plan to handle it? Morning came too soon and too bright. I dragged myself out of bed, showered, and tried to make myself presentable for what was either going to be a wedding or a war zone, possibly both. The hotel was buzzing with activity, caterers setting up, florists arranging centerpieces, and wedding guests getting ready for the big event. Everyone seemed blissfully unaware that the bride had spent the night before screwing the groom's father. I made my way down to breakfast, dreading the thought of seeing Samantha's face across the dining room. Would she look guilty, ashamed, or would she just continue playing the blushing bride like nothing had happened? She was sitting at a corner table with her bridesmaids, laughing at something on her phone. She looked radiant, relaxed, completely at ease, not a trace of guilt or worry on her perfect face. The sight made me want to vomit. "Morning, future mother-in-law," she called out cheerfully when she spotted me. "Ready for the big day?" I managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Ready as I'll ever be." "I'm so excited I could barely sleep," she continued, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the irony. "This is going to be the most perfect day ever." Perfect, right. Daniel appeared a few minutes later, looking surprisingly calm for someone whose world had just imploded. He kissed Samantha's cheek, chatted with the bridesmaids, and generally acted like nothing had happened. If I hadn't seen the video myself, I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing, but I caught him watching Samantha when he thought no one was looking. There was something calculating in his expression, something cold and patient that reminded me of a cat watching a mouse. Richard showed up fashionably late, as always, looking annoyingly well-rested and pleased with himself. He made the rounds, shaking hands and accepting congratulations on his son's upcoming nuptials. When he reached our table, he kissed Samantha's hand with theatrical gallantry. "Sleep well, my dear?" he asked, with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Like a baby," she replied sweetly. I excused myself before I did something I'd regret, like throwing my coffee in both their faces. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of wedding preparations, hair appointments, makeup sessions, final dress fittings. I went through the motions, smiling and nodding and pretending everything was normal while my son's life was about to be destroyed by two people who clearly had no conscience whatsoever. Daniel remained eerily calm throughout it all. Too calm. It was starting to worry me more than if he'd been ranting and raving. The ceremony was set for 5 o'clock on the beach. Golden hour timing for perfect photos. By 4:30, guests were taking their seats in white wooden chairs arranged in neat rows on the sand. The altar was a stunning archway of white roses and greenery, framing the endless blue ocean beyond. I took my seat in the front row, mother of the groom, wearing a navy dress that had cost more than my monthly mortgage and a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. Richard sat across the aisle in the front row for the bride's family, looking distinguished in his charcoal gray suit. We nodded politely to each other, like civilized ex-spouses, both of us playing our parts perfectly. The bridesmaids processed down the aisle in flowing dusty rose gowns, all smiles and carefully choreographed steps. The groomsmen followed, Daniel's college friends and cousins looking handsome and happy. Then came Daniel himself, walking alone down the aisle with quiet confidence. He looked magnificent in his midnight blue suit, tall and handsome, and every inch the successful young man I'd raised him to be. Our eyes met briefly as he passed my row, and he gave me the smallest nod. Whatever he was planning, it was about to happen. The music changed to the traditional wedding march, and everyone rose as Samantha made her entrance. She was, I had to admit, absolutely stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of silk and lace, her veil trailing behind her like something out of a fairy tale. She practically glowed with happiness as she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on Daniel's. Richard walked her down the aisle, playing the proud father figure to perfection. When they reached the altar, he kissed her cheek and whispered something in her ear that made her smile. Then he placed her hand in Daniel's and took his seat. The officiant, a friend of Daniel's from college who'd gotten ordained online for the occasion, began the ceremony with some words about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. I barely heard him. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure everyone could hear it over the sound of the waves. "We are gathered here today," the officiant continued, "to witness the union of Daniel Matthews and Samantha Williams in holy matrimony. This is a celebration of love, commitment, and the beginning of a new chapter in their lives together." I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab my son and drag him away from this farce before it was too late. But I stayed in my seat, watching and waiting and praying that Daniel knew what he was doing. "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed," the officiant said with a smile, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched. I held my breath. Then the officiant turned to Daniel with the traditional question. "Daniel, do you take Samantha to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Daniel looked at Samantha for a long moment. She was beaming up at him, tears of joy glistening in her eyes, completely oblivious to what was coming. Then he smiled, that cold, calculating smile I'd seen at breakfast. "Actually," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the beach, "no, I don't." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ocean seemed to pause, waves frozen mid-crash, as 200 wedding guests tried to process what they'd just heard. Samantha's smile faltered. "What?" I said no, Daniel repeated, his voice steady and clear. "I don't take you as my wife. In fact, I wouldn't take you as my anything." "Daniel, what are you doing?" Samantha whispered, her face pale beneath her makeup. "This isn't funny." "You're right," he agreed. It's not funny at all. What's not funny is my bride sleeping with my father the night before our wedding." The collective gasp from the guests sounded like a wind gust. Samantha's bouquet hit the sand with a soft thud. "That's not true," she protested, but her voice cracked on the words. "Really?" Daniel pulled out his phone. "Because I have video evidence that says otherwise." "Daniel, stop this." Richard stood up from his seat, his face flushed. "You're being ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Daniel laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That's rich, coming from a man who couldn't keep his hands off his son's fiancée." The murmurs from the guests grew louder. Phones started appearing, pointed toward the altar like a firing squad of cameras. "This is insane," Samantha said, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "Daniel, please, you're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was trusting either of you," Daniel replied. "But here's the thing. Samantha, remember that civil ceremony we had last week? The one that made us legally married before this little beach party?" Her face went from pale to gray. And remember that prenup you signed? The one with the very specific clause about infidelity? Daniel, no. Congratulations, Mrs. Matthews, Daniel said with mock cheerfulness. You just cheated yourself out of everything. Samantha swayed on her feet. For a moment, I thought she might actually faint. Then she seemed to pull herself together, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. You can't prove anything, she said defiantly. Can't I? Daniel held up his phone again. Should I play the video for everyone? I'm sure your grandmother would love to see her precious granddaughter kissing my father and calling him Daddy in ways that definitely aren't family appropriate. That did it. Samantha's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the sand in a heap of silk and lace and shattered dreams. Richard was moving now, pushing through the seated guests toward the altar with murder in his eyes. You little bastard, He never finished the sentence. Daniel's right hook caught him square in the jaw, sending him sprawling backward into the sand beside his unconscious daughter-in-law. Touch me again, Daniel said calmly, shaking out his knuckles, and the next one won't be so gentle. The beach erupted in chaos. Guests were shouting, phones were recording, and Samantha's bridesmaids were frantically trying to revive her with what appeared to be a bottle of champagne. Through it all, Daniel stood perfectly calm at the altar, his midnight blue suit somehow still immaculate despite having just knocked out his father. He looked out at the stunned crowd and smiled. Well, he said cheerfully, I think that concludes today's festivities. Thank you all for coming. The bar's still open. Richard was back on his feet faster than I expected, spitting sand and nursing what was definitely going to be a spectacular bruise. His usually perfect hair was sticking up at odd angles, and his expensive suit was ruined, but his ego seemed to be suffering the most damage. You're going to pay for this, he snarled at Daniel, holding his jaw. Both of you. I'll sue for assault, defamation, anything I can think of. Good luck with that, Daniel replied mildly. I'm sure the video of you seducing my wife will play beautifully in court. She seduced me. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Richard seemed to realize how pathetic he sounded. But it was too late to take them back. Meanwhile, Samantha had regained consciousness and was sitting up in the sand, her wedding dress spread around her like a collapsed parachute. Mascara streaked down her cheeks in black rivers, and her perfectly styled hair was now a tangled mess. Daniel, please, she sobbed. I can explain. It didn't mean anything. I love you. I've always loved you. Funny way of showing it, he said. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness. He took advantage of me when I was nervous about the wedding. Richard's face turned purple. I took advantage? You came to my room. To talk! Just to talk about wedding jitters and cold feet, and she was grasping at straws now, her story changing with every word. Right, Daniel said dryly. And that talking required you to be naked because... Samantha opened her mouth, then closed it again. Even she couldn't come up with a lie for that one. The wedding guests were watching this train wreck unfold like it was the world's most uncomfortable reality show. Some had the decency to look away or head for the exits, but most seemed glued to their seats, phones out, recording every sordid detail. I think we should call the police, someone suggested from the crowd. For what? Daniel asked. Adultery isn't illegal. Stupid, yes. Illegal, no. For assault, Richard gestured to his swelling jaw. Self-defense, Daniel corrected. You were approaching me in a threatening manner. I felt scared for my safety. I almost laughed at that. Daniel was 6'2" and in excellent shape. Richard was pushing 60 and definitely not intimidating anyone. But technically, my son was right. This is ridiculous. Samantha struggled to her feet, sand falling from her dress like glitter. Daniel, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can get divorced, Daniel interrupted. Which, thanks to your poor impulse control and our ironclad prenup, should be quite profitable for me. The prenup can be contested with video evidence of infidelity. Good luck finding a lawyer willing to take that case. Samantha's face crumpled again. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She'd cheated herself out of not just a marriage, but a substantial fortune. The prenup Daniel had insisted on, which she'd signed without much thought because she was too busy planning the wedding, was about to cost her everything. Please, she whispered, I'll do anything. I'll sign anything you want. Just don't destroy me like this. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and for a second, I thought he might actually feel sorry for her. Then his expression hardened. You destroyed yourself, he said quietly. I just provided the consequences. The legal aftermath started immediately. Daniel, it turned out, had been planning this moment for longer than I'd realized. While I'd been tossing and turning all night, he'd been on the phone with his lawyer, setting everything in motion. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked him later, after the chaos had died down and the guests had finally dispersed. We were sitting on the hotel balcony, both of us still in our formal wear, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. "I wasn't planning anything until you showed me that video," he admitted. "But once I saw it, I remembered the prenup, the one our family lawyer made us sign, standard stuff," he said, including clauses about infidelity. I spent the rest of the night on the phone with him, making sure I understood exactly what my options were. "You called a lawyer at 3 a.m? Emergency line. Cost me a fortune, but it was worth it." He was quiet for a moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "I kept thinking about all the times you tried to warn me about Dad, all the times I defended him, made you feel like you were the problem. You were protecting your relationship with him. That's normal." "No, it wasn't normal. It was naive, and it cost you years of feeling like you couldn't trust your own instincts." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Daniel, the prenup was perfect timing," he continued. "Ironclad," the lawyer said. "Video evidence of infidelity during the engagement period was grounds for everything I did today. I just had to decide if I wanted to go through with it. And you decided to wait until the altar. I wanted them both to feel what you felt all those years. Humiliated, exposed, powerless." His voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath. "I wanted Dad to watch his son publicly reject everything he stood for, and I wanted Samantha to realize that actions have consequences, even when you think nobody's watching. And now she gets nothing. Well, nothing except the debt from this weekend's festivities. Turns out a beach wedding for 200 people is expensive. Who knew?" I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. What happens next? Divorce proceedings start Monday. Should be fairly straightforward given the circumstances. Then I figure out what to do with all that money I'm not spending on a cheating wife. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the waves roll in. The beach where Samantha's dreams had died a few hours earlier was peaceful now, cleaned up and pristine, as if nothing had happened. "I'm proud of you," I told him finally. "For what? Humiliating my wife in front of 200 people? For standing up for yourself? For not being a doormat like—" I trailed off. "Like you were with Dad?" I winced. I was going to say like a lot of people would be in that situation. "You weren't a doormat, Mom. You were protecting me. There's a difference, maybe. Or maybe I'd just been too scared and too young to know how to fight back properly. But Daniel had learned from my mistakes, and that was what mattered." My phone buzzed with a text message. Richard's name flashed on the screen. "What does he want?" Daniel asked, seeing my expression. I showed him the message. "Can we talk? I know I messed up. Let me explain." Daniel snorted. "Some things never change." "Should I answer?" "Only if you want to. But you don't owe him anything, Mom. Not an explanation, not forgiveness, not even acknowledgement. You've spent enough years cleaning up his messes." He was right. I deleted the message without responding. "So what now?" I asked. "Now we go home. I file for divorce. You go back to your life, and we both try to forget this weekend ever happened. Think you'll be able to?" "Forget, I mean." Daniel considered this. "I don't want to forget. I want to remember exactly how it felt to stand up to them both. I want to remember that I'm stronger than I thought I was." I smiled at that. My son, the romantic idealist, had been replaced by someone harder, more cynical. It should have made me sad. But instead, I felt relieved. The world was a harsh place, and he was finally equipped to handle it. 6 months later, I was having coffee with my neighbor Susan when she asked about Daniel's divorce. "How's he doing with everything?" she wondered, stirring sugar into her cup. "That whole situation was just awful." "He's doing well," I said, and it was true. Better than I expected, honestly. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. As predicted, it had been swift and brutal. Samantha's attempts to contest the prenup had failed spectacularly, especially once Daniel's lawyer presented the video evidence in court. She'd walked away with nothing except legal bills and a reputation that preceded her everywhere she went. Richard had tried to reach out a few more times, apologetic texts, flowers on my birthday, even showing up at my house once with a bottle of wine and a speech about second chances. I'd sent him away without listening to the speech. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. And what about that awful girl? Samantha? Last I heard, she moved back in with her parents, I said. Turns out that real estate empire everyone talked about was more smoke and mirrors than anyone realized. The family was leveraged to the hilt, drowning in debt they'd been hiding behind expensive facades. That explained so much about the desperation I'd sensed from Samantha. The way she'd thrown herself into this marriage like her life depended on it. Because apparently, it had. I still can't believe she did that. The night before her wedding. People do desperate things when they're scared. I said. I'd made my peace with Samantha's choices, mostly because holding on to anger was exhausting. She'd destroyed her own life more thoroughly than any revenge I could have planned. And Daniel? Has he started dating again? Not seriously. I think he's enjoying being single for a while, focusing on work, travel, figuring out who he is when he's not trying to please someone else. It was true. The Daniel who'd emerged from the ashes of his marriage was more confident, more decisive, less concerned with other people's approval. He'd even started setting boundaries with Richard, refusing to answer calls or respond to messages. It was long overdue. As for me, I was doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. The drama of that weekend had reminded me that I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. I'd survived 20 years of Richard's emotional manipulation, raised a good man largely on my own, and when the moment came, I'd done the right thing, even though it was hard. Susan finished her coffee and headed home, leaving me alone on my porch with my thoughts. My phone rang, Daniel's name on the screen. Hey honey, how's work? Good, busy. Listen, I wanted to tell you something. What's up? I got a letter today, from Samantha. I felt my stomach clench. What did she want? To apologize, apparently. For everything. She's in therapy now, trying to work through what she calls her destructive patterns. She wanted me to know that what happened wasn't about not loving me. It was about her own issues with self-worth and making terrible decisions when she's scared. How do you feel about that? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Relieved, I guess. It's nice to know it wasn't really about me. And I hope she gets better. I hope she figures her stuff out. My son, the bigger person. Sometimes I wondered where he got that from. Certainly not from me or his father. You're a good man, Daniel. I learned from a good woman. After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a while longer, watching the sunset paint my neighborhood in warm golden light. My life wasn't perfect. Whose is? But it was mine, on my terms, without anyone else's drama or deception clouding the view. I thought about that night in the hotel hallway, standing frozen outside Richard's door, trying to process what I'd witnessed. I'd felt so powerless in that moment, so small and helpless. But I hadn't been powerless at all. I'd made choices that night, to record the evidence, to tell my son, to trust him to handle the situation. Those choices had led to justice, consequences, and ultimately, freedom for both of us. The love had blinded me once, it's true. For years, I'd made excuses for Richard, convinced myself that his behavior was somehow normal or acceptable. But betrayal has a way of opening your eyes, and once you see clearly, you can't go back to being blind. And me, I never let anyone make me blind again. Not to red flags, not to manipulation, not to my own worth. I'd learned to trust my instincts, stand up for myself, and choose people who deserved my loyalty. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or public humiliation. Sometimes it's just living well, staying strong, and refusing to let other people's poor choices define your story. But I have to admit, watching Samantha collapse in that wedding dress was pretty satisfying too. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.